Okay, well, my name is Nuestro Nyanamoli, and I'm going to be sharing an experience, a near-death experience, sharing a story, and my intention in sharing it with you is to maybe bring a little more peace into your life. From my experience, I gained a greater sense of peace, and I ended up sewing a tapestry that I've never sewn before. So this is the story. I was at a lake party, and there was a water slide. I don't normally go to lake parties. I was a zipline tour guide at the time. This was 2020 during COVID. And I'd been spending the majority of my time up in trees, kind of away from all of the happenings in the world. And I was invited to the lake. It was a gathering of whitewater rafting guides and waterfall rappel guides and zipline tour guides. And I just broken up with my fiance. So I was feeling a lot of heartbreak, and I was with a lot of people at the lake, but because my heart was really hurting, or I was really feeling a lot of pain and missing her, it had only been 3 months since we broke up. I decided to swim out to the middle of the lake and just float on my back, put my ears below the surface of the water, and just be. And I had been practicing meditation for many years, maybe 7 years at that time. Vipassana meditation, but then other techniques with other monks at monasteries. And there was a moment when I was in the water where I entered into a really peaceful space. It was a really deep meditation. It was just really nice. The tension I had from that relationship was just released. And in that moment, I saw or understood how nice it is just to be present, and how no matter what is going on in the world or in my life, I can just be with the water, be with the trees, just be with myself. And in that moment, if I'm centered on just where I am, the thoughts of the past go away, the worries of the future go away. And in that moment, it was so nice. I had the small desire, or small prayer, or small wish. May I spread this with other people? And I now see that desire was like a tiny seed, and it's grown a massive tapestry, which I am continuing to sew. Even last night I was sewing, this morning I was sewing, and I'm speaking here to you, but I'm not generally doing this. I'm generally sewing. I've done maybe 2 of these interviews, but that's a total of maybe 2 hours. I've been sewing for 4 years, 10 hours a day, many days, for about 12,000 hours. So I finished my little meditation in the water, and I decided to join everybody else and be social, which I prefer to be in solitude. So I swim to this dock. There's this rickety old plastic blue water slide. People are going down it. I think, okay, I should join the festivities. I climb up the aluminum stairs. I get to the top of the slide, and I go down head first. And it was blissful. It was really enjoyable. And I came off the end going very fast. I kind of flew over the water, and then I dove into the water and swept my arms back to go deep. And it was a hot summer day, so the water felt really enjoyable. And there was only a split second of that enjoyable feeling, and then I struck the bottom. And what I didn't know was the water was 2 feet deep, and my neck and spine, my head was pushed into my spine and pushed to the side. In that moment, I didn't know I had broken my neck. I did break my neck, but I thought I had been struck by lightning. It was such an intense pain. It radiated out throughout my whole body. And a couple of different things happened in that moment. I felt my head buried in the rocks and the sand of the lake bed. And I had this glimmer of feeling like I was a seed, like I was just planted. Then I shuddered backwards, and my whole body was shaking in pain under the water. I couldn't breathe. And I heard a voice within me that said, slow down. And then I knew something was really wrong. And I stood up out of the water. And when I stood up, I saw that the water only came up to my knees. And around me in the air, was orbs of light. And, normally we hit our head and we see stars. These stars expanded to maybe the size of basketballs. And it seemed as though they each had a personality, and they had each turned toward me, kind of to see if I needed help. Or kind of reflecting on it now, I think maybe they knew I was close to death, so they were getting ready for that transition. So I stumble out of the water and make it to the beach. I'm kind of asking for help, but I couldn't really speak much. Something had happened to my vocal cords. I couldn't feel my fingertips. The whole world felt sideways. Friends helped me over to a bench and laid me down. And because of my military training, I knew I was going into shock. So I asked them to elevate my feet so that I could have more blood in my head. But then the voice within me said, you have to go now. And it was very commanding. And I knew in that moment I didn't have much time before I died. Whatever was happening in my body was so intense, I needed to go to a hospital. So I told people I needed to go to a hospital, but I couldn't really speak. Nobody was listening. So I just took myself and pushed myself up off the bench. That was my intention. But because I couldn't feel my hands, I was somewhat paralyzed or somewhat stirred up from my neck being broken and the nerves, whatever was happening in my neck. I just ended up falling off the bench into the gravel face first and bending my neck more. And at that point, people started seeing, okay, something's really wrong. So I could feel hands lifting me, moving to a car, and we drove to the hospital. It was a 40-minute drive. Once we arrived, the nurses and doctors saw the severity of whatever was going on. I still didn't quite understand what was happening in my body, but I was feeling incredible pain. One thing I was aware of, I was wheeled into the hospital in a wheelchair. Before they put me into a neck brace, I was wheeled into a cavernous room, a waiting room in Asheville, North Carolina, and I was wheeled right in front of this old black man who was facing me, and he was also in incredible pain. He was holding his stomach and screaming, and his screams were echoing the whole space. And in that moment, I was so aware that we were drawn together because of our vibration of intense pain. There was some camaraderie, and even though I couldn't scream my pain, I really felt like we were brothers. And I was again aware of how like attracts like. And I knew in that moment, wow, we're the people suffering the most pain in this moment. And look how we're like magnets coming together. Once my friends told the full story to the nurses, they realized my neck was an issue. They put me on a spine board, they put a neck brace around me, they took me into scans, began checking this. And the next person who spoke to me was a surgeon. And he came over, he said, I'm the neck surgeon or the spine surgeon, and you're very lucky. We looked at your spine and you totally broke your neck. And because you were driving and moving, all of the pieces of your bones have migrated around, and somehow they haven't sliced through your spinal cord, but you're centimeters away from being paralyzed. And we have to have surgery done immediately. But because it's such a complicated surgery, we have to go to the front of your neck and the back of your neck, put out all these screws and take out all this bone. We have to assemble a team. So that won't be done tomorrow. So they take me into a hospital room and they offered me morphine. But I knew from all of my meditation training, the moment of death is very important, and it's important to be very aware. So I declined the morphine and I just laid there observing the pain. And I tried my best just to be aware of it, not as pain, but just as change, because it was a massive amount of change, electrical change, chemical change, the pain radiating up and down my body. And I tried to be just aware of it. And I explained it kind of like riding a wave as a surfer. There was a point where I was able to just ride the pain and just be in awe of how intense it was. Kind of like I had taken really spicy food into my mouth, and just be aware of the flavor of the pain, as opposed to hating it and wanting it to go away, or just kind of accepted, maybe I'm going to die soon, but let me just be aware of this new sensation. It's totally new. To describe the pain of a broken neck, everything below your body is fire. Normally you're paralyzed, but somehow I could still feel, and it was very intense. I did that for a couple hours until I couldn't take it. I was sweating and the bed was soaked, and I said, okay, I'll take morphine. So the nurses come in, give me morphine, and then they started dimming the lights very slowly, and I started being pulled into a tunnel. First thought was, wow, they're being really kind, but they can just turn the lights on. They don't have to do this. But then as I started to notice the room shrieking in front of me, I started to realize I'm dying and I'm being pulled into this tunnel. And even though I'd never experienced this before, I think there's some human knowing or some old memory that we all have. That's kind of how you leave. You leave through a tunnel, something like that. And then I could see the nurses running back into the room, and I could hear still with my ears my own heart flatline. And when they ran in, something in the energy of them running in or of me seeing them brought me back to my body. So I kind of slipped back down into my body. They started checking on me. I could hear my heart beating again. And that was the first moment of starting to disconnect. The next day, I was being prepared for surgery, and I had a strong feeling to ask where my physical body was going. And the words came out of my mouth very soft because it was difficult to speak, but I could feel the questioning wasn't coming from me. It was coming from somebody else or somewhere else, and that was important to know where I would be. So they said, you're going to go, up to this floor, you're going to go over to that room, then ready to come back here, take this elevator. And once I knew exactly where I was going, I felt very much at peace, and I immediately began to observe my breathing. And I did this because I knew I might die. They told me, you may not wake up from surgery, you may die. And you have to know that. I guess it's a legal thing. They even have me sign a paper, which is quite difficult. My right hand wasn't working, so I had to use my left hand to kind of scratch something on the paper. And after I knew all of that was done, I was at peace, and I just began observing the breath coming into my nostrils, going out. And I did this so that I wouldn't have any thought of the future moment and any thought of what I was leaving behind if I were to die. And the more I was just aware of the feeling of the breath, the more the future and the past were released until I was very centered. And I think this helped in the experience of what was to come. The next memory I have is not going somewhere, but it was at the end of some long conversation. I was standing in front of a doorway, like an arched doorway. It was maybe 15 feet tall, but you have to understand that I was out of my body. So space and time and size doesn't really matter. But to me, it was just bigger. It's very tall. and I'm looking at the tapestry. The tapestry now is, I think, 10 feet tall, so it was a little higher than that. And within the doorway were 6 luminous beings of light. And on the edges of them were a white light that kind of radiated out into blue. And the blue faded all the way into the deepest darkness. And then there were kind of stars scattered about, just floating in space. In the center of them, and it looked like they were wearing robes, they were kind of hooded, but it was incredibly peaceful. And in the center of their faces, it was dark. Now, I've shared this only twice before in interviews, and some people will say, oh, had dark faces, they were demons. They were the most peaceful beings I've ever been in front of. And I've been asking them as I'm sewing, can you please give me some information that I can share about why I saw that, so that people will feel peaceful and nobody will be misled into thinking they were not peaceful and they were not benevolent, loving. The answer was they were coming from before light and before dark. Wherever this source of communication was coming from, it's before the separation. So we're living in a world now where we're very aware of good and bad. We're very aware of light. It's very easy to see that difference, but it all comes from the same place, and it all comes back to the same place. There is something that exists that is even before light. It's where the light comes from. The faces of these people was so pure and so unified, and I could feel we're all a part of it. We're all interwoven and connected. That's what was at the center of them, and that's what I was speaking. So if you're imagining like inky black darkness, it was something that's never changed. It's always been there. It's like the silence between a song. I won't speak any more to it, but they were very peaceful beings, and we were having the end of a conversation, and we were making an agreement. And there were 2 parts to this agreement. One was, you won't remember anything you've seen, because if you do, you'll never shut up. And that was the words they used. And it was funny because that's kind of how I would speak. And that's true. I can talk a lot, but I listen to their guidance, and I haven't talked about this that much. And then the second part was, you have to do the work. And I had no idea what the work was. We had our goodbye, and I was then turned away from them and started to move down. I could say a tunnel, but it was as though space was wide open, and I was just kind of moving forward and down. And I could start to see the hospital room, but it just existed in space. And as I became more aware of what I was looking at, I could see my body on the stretcher, and I could feel that I was running, but I felt so free. I felt like I had no bones in my body. I felt like I had no weight in my body. It was so much fun. I felt like I was trying to learn to run, but I didn't have to do anything. And I felt like my limbs were flopping around, but I didn't have any limbs. It was just like light spraying off me, or like rainbows coming out. And I know that sounds, hippy dippy or whatever, but it was so nice. Such a nice feeling. And as I moved toward my body, I could see the nurses in the room, and suddenly I merged with my body. But my vision, my external vision from the body and my human vision, it merged. And I could see the same thing I was seeing even before I entered my body. I started moving my limbs. I was so happy. The nurses kind of told me to settle down. And then the pain returned. I was so fresh to the feeling of being human. It wasn't pain yet. It was just almost fun and enjoyable. Wow, what this weird? Oh, I'm in a body. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. I couldn't move. I was in a neck brace. I had things coming out of my neck to drain blood. They had put in 6 screws, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, titanium scaffolding. It was strange because I could immediately feel cell phone tower radiation, and the scaffolding is titanium. Cell phone towers are titanium emitters. Our cell phones have titanium antennas. So I suddenly became aware of a new sensation. It took me a while to understand what I was feeling. It was as though I could feel somebody always speaking in my neck, kind of humming. I returned home from the hospital. I was unable to use the restroom on my own. Thankfully, I have wonderful friends and family who would help assist me to the bathroom. And about a month after being home, I suddenly had the strange desire to pick up a needle and a thread. I have one here for reference, quite small. And I wanted to sew a rose, a very tiny rose, maybe like this big. I didn't really know why, but as soon as I started threading the needle through the cloth, I felt an incredible amount of joy and peace, similar to what I felt when I was standing in front of these beings. And I didn't know how I was doing it, but I knew what to do next with the sewing. I didn't know what it was supposed to become, but the same voice that had kind of been coming through me gave me the instruction, you need to choose a mantra. You need to choose a mental thought to hold as you're doing this action. I played around with some different ideas, but what I landed on was, may this stitch bring peace to many people. And at that time, friends were just coming over to visit me, and I was just hoping that I could share something with them to convey the peace that I had felt when I left my body, and the peace that had kind of been gifted to me when I returned to my body. but it wasn't really anything given. It was just a reminder that we all have this peace within us and that it's our greatest strength, and that an army of 10,000 men is not as strong as a peaceful abiding, that, a library full of books is not as helpful as just one line of verse that brings peace. And so I continued to sow with this idea of whatever I'm doing, may it be peaceful. And soon the words left. And then I realized if I'm just peaceful, maybe somehow will translate into what I'm doing. Now it's been 4 years. Now it's been 12,000 hours of sowing. I've sown in the Netherlands, Jamaica, South Africa, Costa Rica, Spain, Italy, Sri Lanka, Asheville, North Carolina, where I am right now, which I pray I can be here for a little while and just keep sowing. And what I've realized would take 12,000 hours to explain. Every time I'm sowing, I'm receiving some kind of wisdom, but it's not mine. It's just the general wisdom that exists in the ether, or that we're all connected to. But there are some points that I can kind of share, and I hope the right ones come to mind so that I can share them with you and it can bring you some sense of peace. The first one is we are all very interwoven. And each person, you watching this video, you're very important to the tapestry of everything. And there's no person on the planet who is in the wrong place, and nobody's doing the wrong thing. We're all learning. Now, there are some people that choose very difficult paths and they're committing unhelpful, unwholesome actions. These are like bitter seeds that they're planting. They will produce bitter fruit, and from that they will learn. We live in a time where, you place an order online and you get the package the next day. So a lot of us are calibrated to the idea that things come immediately. But I was able to see when I left my body multiple lifetimes. And as I sow, those previous lifetimes have returned to memory. So I'm aware that some of our seeds that we plant take many lifetimes to germinate, many lifetimes to sprout, many lifetimes to bear fruit. But there is order and a balance to everything. And when I'm sowing, sometimes in the garden area of this tapestry, I will lose that understanding and I'll get a little scared. Maybe I turn on the news and I see what's happening. So then I'll move up and work on a galaxy. And when I'm sowing a galaxy, I'm shown that everything moves at a perfect order. There's stars exploding. There are asteroids colliding. But there's an order to the energy of all of this rotation. And what that then reminds me is that if I'm inhabiting a space of peace, which is not easy, but I can do it by just observing my breathing and just being aware of where I am and not allowing my mind to drift off. If I'm having the intention and attention of being peaceful, it's a resonance and it spreads out like dropping a little stone in a still pond of water, and it goes out and it hits the edges and it comes back. That resonance is felt by other people, and it also attracts me to other peaceful people. It also attracts me to other peaceful locations. And more I find I'm drawn to the mountains where I am right now, or I'm drawn to the forests or the jungles, or the oceans, rivers. And each time I go into those spaces, I'm awash in peaceful energy. I'm around nothing but stillness. And then I'm aware again of when I'm sowing a tree at the center of this tapestry. So I'm not an artist. It's not like I was doing paint and then I started sewing. I just started sewing. I have no idea really what I'm doing. I just trust now that something's helping. But the centerpiece of the tree, I've realized I could have sewn a face or a person, a peaceful person. But whenever we see artwork of an individual, we judge it because we've experienced people and we know people can lie, people can be mean, people can hurt you. So we have some interpretation of any person we see, any face. But a tree, nobody judges a tree. Trees are very kind. And they grow wherever they're planted, and they just adjust to the surroundings. And if you cut them down, so be it. They're not going to scream. But the longer we allow a tree to grow, the more it gives to us. The more it gives us shade. The older it becomes, the more beautiful it becomes. And it always fashions and models itself to be the most beautiful tree in that area. And so I try to be, as much as I can, like a tree. I sit down, I have a needle and thread, and I just sew in meditation. I take long pauses just to observe my breathing and just to feel what I'm feeling in my body. And I realize there's incredible strength. If I'm not speaking, I'm not harming anybody verbally. If I'm just sitting, I'm not harming anybody physically. And if I'm not focused on anything other than my breath, then I'm not harming anybody even in thought. I'm not having any resentful thoughts, any thoughts of anger or any thoughts of worry, all of which cause cancer. And that came through when I was sewing. The beings kind of, I could say channeled. That sounds too woo-woo, but it was very clear. Tensions that we hold in our body get held somewhere in the physical form. Our minds are so super drive right now. Cell phones, so visually attuned, we forget to feel our body. So as I sew, if I feel any tension in my body, I focus on that, I send it love and peace, and I just keep sewing. And this is kind of what's come out. If I have a final parting message for you, it's this, that you're exactly where you need to be, and it's perfect. And there's a part of us that hates that idea and will resist it and say, no, that's not true, because I have this issue with my mom or my friend, job, or where I live, or there will be something that we're resisting. Those things that come up and say, no, that's not true. It's not perfect because of fill in the blank. That's your teacher. And that's being presented to you because that's exactly where you need to work. If you turn and face whatever it is that is tension in your life or the part that you don't like, if you can allow that to relax and you can let it go, it's difficult. If you can let it go, more beauty and more abundance and more peace will come into your life. And it's said a lot to let things go. It's very difficult to think about it and then somehow put it in a box and toss it away. And I'm not able to do that either. But what I am able to do is just be where I am. So right now, I'm looking at the trees and the mountains. That's where I am. Right now, I can feel my breath. That's where I am. And the more I bring my attention to where I am, there's no space for any thoughts to come in. And the more I just inhabit now, the nicer it is. And the guidance I would offer, and you can try it later, I'm just planting a seed for you, is to sit in silence. You don't have to call it meditation. You don't have to call it prayer. We all have ideas of what prayer and meditation are, and we have some slight resistance to it. Otherwise, we'd be doing it more. But you literally just have to sit in silence with the legs folded and close your eyes. People who have NDEs all receive grand messages, beautiful visions. And it's beautiful to hear because it reminds us of something that we kind of know. And we kind of want that for ourselves. But if you want to receive a message, you have to do what everybody who has had an NDE has done. And what we've all done is close our eyes. Some of us for a while, people are in comas, but everybody checks out of their senses. And it's what the Buddha taught, and it's what Jesus taught. So I hope this video brings some sense of peace to you. And I'm going to continue to meditate every day. I hope and pray and have the desire that at some point you take some time, either when you wake up or before you go to bed, just to close your eyes and just to sit quietly and do nothing. If it hurts or it's painful or you're bored, just be with it and give yourself a moment to receive some wisdom. Give yourself a moment to receive some visions. If you want a sign from God, maybe be quiet and let him say something. And I wish you the best on your path. I think we're all here to learn, and we're on our own individual spiritual paths. But I think the best thing about path is that around every turn, you find a new friend, and they can say, "Oh yeah, this is the next turn. You take that road. That's a good." So I'm the friend on the path just for today, and I'm saying, "Hey, a good path is just to sit down and be quiet." All right. Well, blessings to anybody who's seeing this. I hope this is helpful, and maybe we continue to plant good seeds, and may we continue to be good gardeners of the earth.